So yeah, Parker, thanks for joining DAO Talk. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, maybe you can get us started. Just tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you came to be working in crypto/Web3.
Sure. So I'll start with the present. I'm currently head of community and on the investment team at FinTech Collective. We have a dedicated fund to investing in decentralized financial infrastructure. I'm also on the founding team of Boys Club, a social club and DAO focused on welcoming women and non-binary individuals into Web3.
Awesome.
I've always been really interested in systems of power in our society. Specifically in college, studied a very niche major called critical theory, which at its core is just an interrogation of systems of power. I started getting really into tech in my junior year of uni. And growing up, none of my family members and my peers were into tech, finance, or entrepreneurship. In fact, I'd say the general sentiment from my peers was kind of anti that world. But I started getting really into bleeding edge technology like AI, brain machine interfaces, did some work in VC and product management, and really got into crypto. I'd known about it for a while. I knew that it existed for a while, but I got really into it and sort of had my light bulb moment when I started researching blockchain and realizing that, like other technological innovations in our past, like computing, AI, the World Wide Web, blockchain has the fundamental infrastructure, an opportunity to change not just financial infrastructure, but all kinds of systems of power and systems of operation in our world, from like supply chain, manufacturing to data, privacy. And that really excited me.
That's super cool. I feel like I've never heard of that field of study, systems of power. It's kind of like intuitive to me what it is, just based on like the context of what you just said. But
Yeah.
will you tell me more? Like, just curious, like what exactly are systems of power, and then what are examples, and how do you kind of see like Web3, blockchain, crypto fitting into that?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think maybe to sort of frame the scope of the major and curriculum, it'd be helpful to give examples of some of the different classes I took. One of my favorite was critical discourse analysis, which was using methodological forms of analysis to analyze different kinds of media and really understand what is the message being said here, what is the assumption being made about the audience and what they already know, and sort of like what are the underlying implications or motivations or objectives that this message is trying to achieve. Another was resistance movements and the law, which was kind of a critical take on legal theory. So I studied different resistance movements across the world and society, and then also a lot of legal case studies. So that sort of went into community mobilization and different kinds of legal work done within specific communities. But I would say most of the people that go through that major go on to either work for a nonprofit or start like a nonprofit themselves or do some kind of like legal pro bono work.
Cool. So do you view like blockchains and Ethereum as kind of like a new system for power, like a new framework for like influence and things like that?
Yeah, I definitely think, there's a really interesting idea to draw on here, sort of about evolution versus revolution. I think revolution is sort of, you can think of it as disruption. I definitely think blockchain brings that. But I think what blockchain really brings is an opportunity to fundamentally reimagine a lot of these systems of power that are currently in place today with centralized banks, et cetera. And so not just come in and disrupt them, but present a fundamentally new layout or infrastructure for us to build upon in that sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think like, we're only starting to see some of those things played out. I mean, maybe the first like part one of crypto was like, how can we reimagine money, right? How can we reimagine maybe even finance? But I think with the last couple of years of development in Web3 and NFTs, we're starting to see that play out in more areas than just money.
100%. I think that's part of what's so exciting about this new technology. Not only does it bring the opportunity to redistribute and generate wealth for historically underserved communities, it also brings so much more to the table with touching on points of social mobilization and organization, full value capture for creators, different means of relationships between creators and their audiences, and so forth. So it's like so much more than just financial infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, in talking with different folks who are really focused on kind of bringing historically marginalized groups into crypto and Web3, it feels like there's a sense of urgency right now because it's kind of like, I think we all believe slash hope that Web3 is having somewhat of a breakout moment over the next several years and want to make sure that people don't get left behind, right? Especially groups that maybe historically have been left behind by other legacy systems of power. Like I was talking with Brian Tran from Seraph Space earlier this morning. He was talking about how there haven't historically been a lot of institutions or venues available for LGBTQ folks to connect and convene. Kind of Web3 opens up this new space there. So I know that I think you said you're a founding member of Boys Club and you do a lot of work there. I know you all are heavily focused on bringing in women and non-binary folks into the Web3 space. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing there, why you think it's important?
For sure. Yeah. So you captured the overview really well. When we think about, what blockchain and crypto bring to the table, these new frontiers that present new opportunities for innovation, accessibility, wealth generation, wealth creation. And, like I said before, sort of comparing or seeing blockchain as another technological innovation and inflection point, similar to AI computing the internet, that really changes the way that our world works, plays, connects, exchanges, and captures value. We have the opportunity right now to shape the future of that system in a way that brings people who have been historically excluded from designing and shaping those previous technological innovations in the past that are now so influential in our society. We have the opportunity to bring those people in to experimenting with this technology, being a part of product design, being a part of user testing, which we all know is so important. And so I think, in order to mitigate the existing inequalities in our society onto this new frontier, it's absolutely urgent that we bring historically underrepresented and historically underserved communities into the direct creation and the forefront of the beginning of this industry as it's starting to take shape and form.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think y'all from the outside looking in are doing an amazing job. I'm like a marketer slash community person by trade, and Boys Club's marketing is some of the best, if not the best, in the space.
Thank you.
In my opinion. It just has a really consistent tone that I also feel strikes this really cool balance. One of the cool things about Web3 is you can be fun, and it's a little bit irreverent, kind of strikes that balance of super clean and crisp, but also a little bit wild. Anyway, I'm kind of fanboy. But anyway, would love to hear more. What's the growth been like? I assume y'all were founded relatively recently. Seems like there's been a lot of growth. What's that experience been like? What have been some of the challenges and lessons learned along the way?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the kind and affirming words. First of all, I'm lucky to work with a team that is so funny.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Anyway, I listen to podcasts, the titles of the podcast crack me up.
Yeah, and our Twitter is very communal. We all have the login, so we all just go on there and shitpost.
Yeah.
So it's a super fun time.
Nice.
And it's always
Nice.
sometimes we'll send tweets in that have been posted to our group chat and be like, whoever posted this, so good. We never know.
That's
but
funny.
the growth has been spectacular, and really, really far higher demand than we ever expected. So Dina and Natasha, to give some context here, the co-founders of Boys Club, initially started with this idea to, bring some women together on their roof for natural wine, teach them about crypto, friends. posted about it online and ended up deciding to do this sort of beta test of a 12-person dinner for crypto curious women in New York City. That once they posted that online and posted the tickets online, sold out in an hour. They posted 100 more tickets, sold out in an hour.
Nice.
And the wait list was building until the day of the event. So the demand there was shocking, and we've continued to see that over time. That was in November of 2021. So it's been about 6 or 7 months. Since then, we've scaled our Discord. We have launched a podcast, a merch line. We are fortunate enough to have captured the attention of, credible news organizations like Bankless, Vox, The Atlantic, Fast Company. So definitely a lot more demand than I think we could have ever expected and hoped for. But I think that really speaks to the need for a community like ours in the space and a voice like ours in the space. Like you said, we're not just all serious all the time. We're a really funny, I'd say, witty group, and we like to have fun and bring a really energized and playful, voice to crypto.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think like a lot of times, I'm really happy to hear that y'all are building some relationships with media, because I think in general, like mainstream media coverage of crypto like is challenging, right? Where I think there's somewhat of a knowledge gap, but also specifically from like a diversity and inclusion perspective, crypto obviously like has room to improve in that area, which is why you're doing what you're doing. But I feel like oftentimes like the media coverage maybe doesn't do as good of a job as highlighting like the solutions or like the folks that are actively working on it. So I'm super stoked to hear that y'all are getting some traction there.
Yeah. Definitely super fortunate to have had the opportunity for, our work and our platform to be amplified by some of these, news publications and organizations. But there's definitely a lot of work that's happening within Boys Club that I think, some of that attention has failed to capture. I mean, Bankless has done an amazing job, but, some of the more mainstream, I guess, Web2 news organizations maybe haven't taken such a positive spin on the space generally, like you said. And I think, one thing that I'd love to highlight is, when you ask about growth, I can talk about sort of our external facing growth and that sort of sense. But, within the community too, there's been so much growth. Like we've grown to have 7 working guilds within Boys Club, each of which are focused on operating a different aspect of Boys Club that is essential to keeping it running day to day. So, onboarding guild, social media guild. I'm leading our DAO operations guild, and we are lucky to have a group of incredibly diverse, incredibly talented and committed group of contributors within the community that are really making it what it is today.
That's awesome. I think I read y'all posted like an article about how you're thinking about decentralization as well. If I remember correctly, it's more of like a progressive approach or like a walk before you run approach, which makes a lot of sense to me. Will you tell me a little bit more about that? Like what, kind of how are you thinking about being a DAO, becoming a DAO, decentralization in general?
Great question. Starting a DAO is a lot harder than it seems, I think. At least that's been my experience.
Yes.
Coming into Boys Club and working on Boys Club, I knew that this was sort of the aspect of our work and organization that I wanted to be the most heavily involved in. And the process really took a lot longer than I expected. So it started with a ton of research over the course of like 4 or 5 months. And I expected that research to be a lot shorter, like more like 1 month. But, we are like severely lacking in DAO literacy, I think. And, there's a lot of great articles that people have published. But in addition to reading those articles, it's not just about tooling, but about actual design, like governance design, community design, onboarding design. You're really essentially creating a microeconomy and a micro political system, and you're using those design systems to try to fuel and fit the culture that you want to see for your community. So it's a lot of different aspects together. Initially, I wanted to sort of jumpstart everything. So, I was talking to every single tool, thinking about every sort of way that we could DAOify. But over time, it became clear that the more sustainable approach to take, and I will give a shout out to my DAO Guild co-lead, Amy. She works at Bankless Consulting. She's amazing. And, she really came in and we started really talking together about, taking this sort of, like you said, slower approach and more experimentative approach. And that's really core to, one of our values, which is experimentation and experimenting in public at Boys Club. So we decided to take a MVC, or minimum viable community approach, which is essentially using the minimum amount of tools with the minimum amount of contributors to begin with to effectively coordinate and mobilize change within the larger organization. So what we're doing is, we've set out a few KPIs and a few actionable and executionary oriented goals to accomplish over the course of 3 months within this group of contributors that already exists within Boys Club. So that's the founding team, all of the guild leads across those 7 guilds that I mentioned earlier, and then the guild contributors within those. That's about 50 total. So we're going to start implementing some of the processes, some early tooling, and sort of design work that we've decided upon, and test and iterate this and make sure that it's a good fit for our community, and also gather feedback before we scale this and sort of open the DAO up to a larger group of people.
That's awesome. Yeah. Like the first thing you said, like, I think it was something like becoming a DAO is a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah.
I had that realization too. I was kind of like a crypto hobbyist for a year or two, and only recently joined full time about 4 months ago. And like working for Tally, you kind of like quickly get exposed to the DAO world. And like from the outside looking in, if you just look at Twitter, you're like, oh, there's so many DAOs because everyone like likes to tweet about DAOs. It's like sort of like thought leader, low hanging fruit. But once you dig in, you're like, wow, like this is so much like more early and more raw than I thought. I personally think there's probably only hundreds of DAOs that are actually functioning and like meaningfully decentralized, as opposed to thousands or, in the future, millions, right? Like it's the equivalent of like an LLC or C Corp. It's like an innovation in how to share trust between people. And so there's like so few of them that like in the scale of the world, there's basically none, right? And so when you dive in, you're like, wow, there's so much to do here, But at the same time, like it gives me like great admiration for the folks that are like actually doing it, because it's like very, very pioneering work. So super excited to watch, Boys Club like continue to make that transition over time.
Thank you. Me too. And I think you're right. There's so many DAOs. I think there are also a lot of DAO tools, probably more than DAOs at this point.
Yes.
So hot take for you. I'm a firm believer that, not everything should be a DAO, and actually probably most things should not be a DAO. So I think, there's this really important question that begs to be asked of any DAO is like, why DAO? And I have a lot of, peers, friends, startups I know like coming to me saying, okay, we want a DAO. We want to make ourselves into a DAO. We want to create a DAO. And usually, sort of, asking like, what is my opinion on this? And, I would say like over 70% of the time, I'm like, I don't think this is a great idea.
Yep.
Because, like we've been talking about, running a DAO is really like running a second startup. And this brings me to this other thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is I'm a firm believer in community before DAO. Like I think we're seeing a lot of people that want to start DAOs and are really passionate, really interested, which is all energy that I respect and admire and encourage. But these people want to build these DAOs, but don't have the community for it, and so it's sort of like, okay, what's the point? It's almost like, with startups, rather than finding a problem and finding a solution to fix it, starting with a solution and trying to find the right problem for it to fit.
Right.
And that's sort of like the analogy that I'd make there. So I also think, again, there's not enough literacy and literature. There's not a strong body of literature yet around DAOs. And so I think a lot of, especially these startups that maybe are already in crypto or kind of are in Web2 and want to start DAOifying, really don't understand like the amount of bandwidth and time and energy and resources that it will take not only to get this DAO off the ground for V1, but also to continue to maintain and operate it in a sustainable way over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the Web2 world, there's this famous saying of like, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but it's basically like, you want to move fast and break things unless it's an irreversible decision, right? And DAOs, they're not irreversible, but it is somewhat of a one-way door. If you take an existing organization, for example, and like turn it into a DAO, like I guess you could undo that, but like it's probably not something you want to you want to undo. And so yeah, I think like really considering whether that's the right thing is really smart. We're kind of in the early stages of working on some like curriculum, like basically DAO curriculum at Tally. And we've aligned on like starting with exactly what you said, like why a DAO. That's sort of like before you get to like governance models, like tokens, like even community in the sense of like Discord or trying to like scale up the operations of the community. Like before you get to any of that, legal structures, like none of it. It's like, why? Right? Like, why is this a DAO? And then like from there, it's like mission, which like mission is an interesting thing. I actually think like it's a key tool for decentralization. Like some people might say like, no, you shouldn't have a mission because like you need that to become like fully organic and bottoms up. And I think it's great like to do a little bit of that, but ultimately I think like mission can be a really strong guiding light that like helps people or like self-organize in a decentralized way.
Totally. I completely agree with you, probably even more to the extent of like mission is absolutely necessary. Because I think in order to have a sustainable community and in order to create ownership, you first need to attract a network of intrinsically motivated participants. And unless you have a clear statement about what you're doing, why you're here, who you're for, and what you're trying to achieve, you will never be able to attract those people who are intrinsically motivated to participate in your community.
Wow, network of intrinsically motivated participants. That is like a really good way to describe a DAO. I like it. I like it. And obviously, like intrinsic is a key word, right? I think we're seeing communities of people who are mostly extrinsically motivated kind of like go through a lot of challenges, right? Like token prices are going down and you kind of see like as the water goes out, right? Some communities were swimming naked because like they didn't have a mission. People were there only for the price, etc. Yeah, not sustainable.
Even like angel investors who did token investments, and those tokens are like governance tokens, like selling those tokens is crazy to me. Like, especially early stage, just like, oof.
I'm sure like with your experience in VC, like it's super interesting, like funding models, right? Like in crypto, in some ways it's super powerful that you can raise funds super early, right? And also that there's like liquidity around that. Like in some ways it's a blessing, like it enables activity like Constitution DAO, where you're just like that has pros and cons, but like the fact that it's even possible is interesting, right? So it's like a strength, but it's also a weakness. Like I think there's a very good reason the VC model works the way it does, because it does a pretty good job of aligning the parties, like, employees, investors, founders, and like there's some like serious challenges in crypto because like that's kind of inverted, where people are almost incentivized to like mercenarily extract value from the project. So I think there's a lot of tools we need to develop as a community to figure out how we can like drive that intrinsic alignment like you're describing. But I think having a mission, you're definitely selling me on the idea that that's like a very necessary one of them.
Yeah. Totally. And I agree, about your comments and observations about VC. I think, VC is really a partnership. Like you're a team when you're investing, especially at such an early stage. And one question that I really respect, and that is a good signal to me when, founders I'm talking to say, this is what we're looking for in an investor, and this is what we want our investors to bring to the table. And I think that's really good, because I think it's a two-way street, and it should be more like a partnership than just, trying to get whoever you can on your cap table. So founders that are being really intentional about how they want to work with their investors and what they're looking for in an investor is a really good sign to me that they're really thinking about how are we building out our ecosystem of stakeholders, right? And people who will be very involved, in providing not just monetary resources, but other kinds of resources, and other kinds of doing work together, throughout our lifespan and as we grow.
Awesome. Well, thanks for exploring like all those topics with me. I mentioned this earlier, but I'm really looking forward to following along with Boys Club because, like you said, there's not that many DAOs, and like, being able to observe a team of sort of like smart people, especially people who might not be like, maybe they haven't created like a ton of DAOs before. It sounds like you have some folks who are like have more of that experience, some less, but like I don't know. I think it's kind of nice when people bring relatively fresh eyes to it. It's like they have enough exposure to crypto to like know what they're doing, but they're not like fully baked in like all their perceptions.
Totally.
So like I really enjoy kind of like learning from people who are like new-ish, trying to
Totally.
build and create in DAOs, because I think it kind of helps you observe like when they come to certain decisions from first principles, like kind of what's working and what's not working in the space.
Yeah. And there's one more comment that I'd love to make before we move on here, which is sort of just to answer the question that I raised earlier of why even start a DAO and the importance of being able to answer that. One of the things about Boys Club that has made me the most energized and excited is seeing the community-led and driven projects that are coming out of Boys Club. So even like pre-DAO structure, right? We have current contributors and just like community members in our Discord with so many amazing ideas. We have women that are asking to translate our educational curriculum and roadmaps from English to Spanish. We had one of our contributors pitch this idea of starting a product incubator within Boys Club, where the guild votes on community ideas and startups and projects that they're currently working on and takes them through an 8-week cycle of user testing, user feedback, consultancy, market research to help them develop that. And just a lot of amazing ideas. One more was a wingman program that matches crypto newbies coming into our ecosystem with crypto native people in our ecosystem. So like founders, investors that have been around in the space for a really long time to hop on Zoom calls every week, help them set up their wallet, really hold their hand. And none of those awesome projects would have happened without the input of the community and without the ability for those community members to really have that ownership and take that ownership. So for us, a DAO structure really enables everything that is working most well about Boys Club and that we love the most about Boys Club, which is community ownership, community-led projects, community-driven projects. And a lot of people ask, like, okay, I mean, even our team is like, okay, what is Boys Club really going to be when it grows up? That's like still something we're figuring out. But at the same time, in my ideal world, I won't speak for anyone else on my team, but in my ideal world, Boys Club is sort of a collage of all of these different projects and initiatives that have been community-led, whether that's like a product incubator, whether that's like a zine project, a media project, crypto literacy project. So I think a plethora of all these things. And, the DAO structure really enables that and helps us accelerate that.
That's awesome. It's a good call to answer your own question.
Yeah.
Don't leave the
Definitely
audience
need to do
hanging.
that.
You're kind of like seeing that emergent behavior already and just applying more to it. That's awesome.
Right. And so a DAO structure, like in this sense, like adding a DAO structure to a community is not going to enable these things or force them to happen, right? Adding a DAO structure to a community where this is already working is only going to make that process to ownership more frictionless and reduce, like, obviously intermediaries to allow us to move really fast and break a ton of stuff.
Awesome. Cool. Well, have like more of like a broad question for you about like crypto, Web3, DAOs in general. Feel free to take it however you want. It's a two-part question. Part one is, what do you love most about working in the space, like crypto, Web3, DAOs? What like makes you stoked to, keep working on it, mornings, nights, weekends? And then the second part is, what is one part of the space or aspect of the space that you don't love and that may like frustrate you and like you are hoping to, address over time?
Great questions, and so many ways to answer both. The first, what do I love most about the space and what keeps me excited to work nights and weekends? Definitely the people. Like I said before, crypto and blockchain have so many access points, whether that's art, social coordination, identity, privacy, finance. And it's really the intersection of all of these things and the people that are working. Inherently, if you're working in crypto, I'd argue that you're working sort of at the intersection of all of these things. And we're seeing more and more crossover between DeFi, NFTs, DAOs, everything, right? And so that's super exciting. And I think everyone, has this sense of optimism. And one other thing that I really like about the people in the space is how much they challenge each other and openly challenge each other's ideas, and how contestation, I think, is welcomed, oftentimes as a form of respect, right? Like, I want to work with people and be friends with people that don't agree with everything I say and that challenge my ideas and push me to be better. And that's something that I see a lot of in the crypto space as well. So the collaborative side of things, both on, working together and pushing each other to be better. One thing I'd like to see change, that's hard. I mean, I feel like a lot of the answers that I could give are pretty obvious. I mean, I think representation outside of just gender is super important and something that we need to be talking more about, and having conversations on. And like, those are the conversations that are some of the hardest to have, I think, but that's why it's so important that we have them. So, racial representation, socioeconomic diversity in age group, right? Are all things that I would love to see us talking more about and working more towards. I think another thing is sort of, I've been thinking a lot about like general perception of crypto. Obviously not too bullish right now, I'd say, in general media. My
Yep.
parents are like sending me bad articles every day, and they're like, are you okay?
Are you helping Bitcoin
And I'm
burn
like,
down the
"Guys."
rainforest?
Yeah, literally. I think one thing that's really important that I'd love to see more of is like and I don't think this is a problem, but to be effective at really reaching the masses. I think it's essential that we consider all these different touch points of crypto. And when we're talking to normies about crypto, don't just point out the most obvious thing that you think they would be interested in. And I've seen this with like a lot of my friends and family that I've kind of brought in. Like my best friend, Luca, she's an artist. She's really into art. For a while, I was trying to get her in and to see like the light through NFTs and like, full value capture, all of that stuff. And she was not into it. She's never been into it. But then I sent her this peer-reviewed article that I read about DAO governance. And she FaceTimes me like a week later from London. And she's like, Parker, like I haven't slept in like a week. I've just been reading about DAO governance. I'm going to start my own DAO for artists in London.
You
I was
DAO
like,
killed her.
let's
That's awesome.
go, right? But that wasn't the most obvious avenue. The most
Yeah.
obvious avenue would have been art, and similar with other
Right.
people. So I think it's like, go beyond just what seems like an obvious connection to make for someone to bring them into the space, and like try all of these different things. And I'm non-technical, right? But one of the things that I'm most interested in and passionate about and excited about right now in this space is zero knowledge rollups, zero knowledge powered dApps, all of this. And like, that's very technical stuff and wouldn't be necessarily, I think, the most obvious thing that I gravitate towards. So just, continuing to spread the message.
Yeah. Wow. Really good answers. There's so many things I like want to react to. It's funny. By far, the most common answer to the question of what keeps you going is the people. Different variations of that, which in fact, it's pretty much like the only answer I get, which is crazy because like, I don't know, crypto has this reputation or perception of being like completely technical. And I think turns out that like people are really in the space because they have like genuine relationships with like smart people that challenge them and are excited about what they're working on. So love to hear that answer. I think representation, I'm really glad you brought that up. Maybe it's obvious. I don't think it's obvious to everyone. And I think maybe like you point out like, okay, there's different types of representation. I think that's really important. Like, I think you talked about socioeconomic, like different socioeconomic, situations, challenges. Like that's such an important one, right? Like in many ways, crypto has the most potential for folks who are like underbanked and or like have challenges accessing the mainstream financial system. But like currently it's very expensive to use crypto and like super technical and like, really requires a laptop to do it safely, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That's just like a random example, but there's so many different ways to think about like accessibility and representation that I think are really important. I feel like y'all are doing a good job kind of like modeling what that could look like as far as like I think there's this like flywheel where it's like you've created this community, people feel like they can identify with your community is something that like represents them or like they can identify with, they get into crypto, repeat, right? I think that's like super important and super bullish for the space. Like Tommy, who's my co-host of DAO Talk, he's like, I just send like all of the like women in my life that I'm trying to crypto pill, I'm just like, go to Boys Club, like, and it's like way easier for him to do that than to be like, trying to like convince them from his perspective. You know what I mean? So I hope we see like more organizations. I think I mentioned Brian from Sarah Space is like, it's slightly different than Boys Club, but like taking a similar approach with LGBTQ community. So hopefully we'll see like more and more of these groups kind of like Boys Club spinning up, trying to help folks like with a core nucleus of folks from a certain, background, trying to help other people get into the space.
Totally. And Seraph is awesome. We love Seraph. Yeah,
Awesome.
Big fans.
And you talked about ZKPs. Okay, so I feel like you talked about ZKPs and mass mass perception or like comms with like the mainstream. I think it's really cool that you're into ZKPs and you're non-technical, because I actually think like one of the root causes of the challenge that crypto has from like a mass perception standpoint is that there weren't enough technical people who understand like how to frame, package, like present, communicate things early on. Like you just like look at the Bitcoin community, right? It's just like, I think it's gotten worse since Ethereum launched, as far as because it took away maybe some of the folks who more had that like mindset, but like it's just tough. Like the PR is just brutal. It's basically just like, if you don't like us, go away. It's like, I thought you wanted to be like the world's default currency. Like, why, and so like ZKPs are kind of at that stage, right, that Bitcoin was 10 years ago, where it's like this raw, like extremely interesting, like technical innovation, cryptographic innovation. And I think if we can have folks who like understand it like from the perspective of like the consumer or the public early on and are involved in the industry, it will go a long way towards like, yeah, like helping prevent some of those issues down the road. Anyway, sorry, I just had a lot of thoughts on
No
that.
worries. Yeah, totally agree.
Cool. Well, last question, not crypto related at all. What is your favorite place in the world and why?
Okay. If you know me, you'll probably know the answer to this. Berlin, for sure.
Cool.
Berlin is like my favorite place in the entire world.
That's a very good crypto answer. I feel like Berlin is like, yeah, has a lot of density with
Totally.
Web3.
Oh my God, yeah. Like, okay, so the first time I went was in 2019, and it was like the 31st anniversary of the fall of the wall, which is amazing. And, 31 years is not a long time. Like, and it's so amazing to be in this city and see this city that is so new and has this obviously rich and extremely important history tied to it. But when you think about the sort of history of how Berlin came together, it was like all of these fringes of society uniting. And that was sort of the birth of like the techno nightlife kind of alternate, you could say, like to be podcast friendly, like culture that came out of it is like this celebration of life and fluidity and a celebration of unity. So there's so many amazing things about Berlin. I mean, I love techno, I love dancing, I love that whole scene. But also, if you're walking around, you'll notice that most of the sidewalks, like half of the sidewalk is a bike lane. Nobody uses dryers there. Everyone hangs their clothes. Like in any Berlin flat or Airbnb, you will not see a dryer. That's like very weird. I've never actually seen one there. And so, it's very forward thinking, energy efficient, but it's also super creative, super fluid place. And I think one thing that really speaks to like the cultural difference of Berlin, between cities like New York and LA is like, in these nightclubs, right, you're not allowed to take any photos or videos. So when you go in, they always put like stickers on your phone cameras, or you'll have to like turn in your phones. And at first, when I first got there, I like thought to myself like, like, I don't know how safe I feel with having no accountability around me. But what I actually noticed is, that sort of removal of the ability to kind of objectify, and sort of like commercialize the nightlife scene actually led everyone to be super present, super attentive. Like people go to the club alone and it's not weird because they're just there to like vibe, dance, have their night, do whatever. And I've made so many friends there. Versus, when I go to New York clubs, LA clubs, it's like everyone just goes there to like, number one, like buy tables, impress girls, take Instagram photos, take Snapchat videos. I don't even know. I'm not on Snapchat, but like there's a totally different purpose behind it. And, not to mention just like amazing parks, amazing beer, amazing food. Like the Israeli food and Middle Eastern food there is so good. I could go on and on, but yeah, best place ever.
That sounds amazing. I've never been, and I think you just moved it up on my list. Sounds
So
awesome.
here's the thing, though, is like everyone I talk to that's been to Berlin either loves it or hates it. I've never met, and I also love brutalist architecture.
Okay.
Like huge brutalist architecture girl. So that also factors into this. But some people, a lot of people I know hate Berlin because they're like, it's ugly, it's depressing, it's weird. So I think there's like, two sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, I like places that have character though.
Yeah.
Like that's actually I've never even been to Western Europe, even though I've traveled like internationally a fair amount, just to like, I guess, less typical places to go as an American. And that's part of the reason is like, I'd like to go to places that are like, I don't know, not for everyone. So
Yeah.
you're now I'm even more interested.
Let's go.
Cool. Well, thanks, Parker. Really appreciate you joining DAO Talk. Hope you have a great rest of the week during NFT NYC. Looking forward to seeing some of your panels too at DAO NYC on Wednesday.
Thank you. I'm so excited, and thank you so much for having me. This is an amazing opportunity, and I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.